Hey guys, it's Mike, and you're watching Mike's Rockin' Relics. So last week on the show, we started to examine some of the earliest forms of blues music, and we talked about W.C. Handy and his discovery of the genre, as well as Mamie Smith and the first blues recording. But today we're going to track some of the earliest influences of the blues and talk about how music looked in the 1800s and early 1900s. Stay tuned. Music that existed in the middle of the 1800s to the late 1800s. Of course, we had indigenous music that had been here for a long time, but we also have gospel music coming through churches. We have military marches and marches in general. That was a form of music. We have things like the minstrel groups that were traveling around and doing theater presentations, and they had their own music that was going on with that. There was classical music as well, and traditional folk music from Europe had been part of the culture in North America for a long time. A new style of music had emerged called Appalachian folk music, and that was starting to be a thing as well. And early forms of bluegrass music were starting to take place, certainly after the Civil War, as people started to travel a little bit more and hear other people's music that started to expand. But you have to remember, this is a time before any type of recorded sound, so the only music you ever heard was if it was being performed in front of you. And if you lived in rural communities, it might be totally plausible that you'd never heard music in your life, except for maybe at a church. Of course, a major form of music that had really yet to be discovered was that came to North America through the slave trade, and African influenced music took the form of spirituals and other types of singing that was done in fields or after work hours, and eventually would be one of the major influences on the genre of blues. By 1731, there was an advertisement for an actual concert that took place in Boston, Massachusetts, in the great room of somebody's house. So at this point, we start to see that music is being advertised and that performances are going to be attended by people that are interested in watching live music. So this is a really big breakthrough, and this is highly regarded as the first ever concert in the colonies. Fast forward about 30 years later, and advertisements, when people are selling slaves, are starting to include whether or not slaves are musical and have the ability to play music. And so, as ugly as this sounds, it's starting to be a selling feature that when people are being sold, that whether or not they're musical or not is actually important. And for the slaves themselves, it's a way to get themselves out of the fields and into the homes. Okay, so in an upcoming bunch of episodes, we're going to talk about some of the early blues influences from certain states like Texas or Louisiana or Georgia, and certainly the Mississippi Delta. This is coming up. But before this all happened, that we saw recordings from this part of the world and things like this, we did start to see the formation of a publishing group in New York City. And this other music was existing at the same time, but the publishing industry started to focus on songs that were being written and could be put into sheet music. And this was a group of people that now we call Tin Pan Alley, and it was in a building in New York City. And this group of people started to write and compose songs and collect songs from all over the country and piece them together into sheet music that then you could sell at music shops or general stores and early department stores across the United States and Canada. In the latter part of the 19th century, the creation of the music industry became dominated by a group of publishers known as Tin Pan Alley. Their representatives spread throughout the country buying local songs for their publishers, as well as pushing their own publishers' latest songs. Song demonstrators were constantly touring and spreading out across music stores, department stores, and general stores, not only selling sheet music, but performing the songs that they carried. By the late 1800s, a piano was considered a must-have in any middle class or higher home, and the songs of Tin Pan Alley flooded North America. The term Tin Pan Alley comes from a writer by the name of Monroe Rosenfeld, who worked for the New York Herald, And he compared the sound of multiple pianos with questionable intonation in one building to the sound of kids banging on tin pans. And the name stuck. If you wanted to check out the building, it's in Manhattan, West 28th Street. There is a plaque there now, but it is the original building. It doesn't really look like it now. You can't really tell that this is what went on here, but for about a 50-year period, this was the center of the music industry in North America. So here we have a piece of sheet music that dates back to 1905, and as you can see, very derogatory person in blackface here at the top. But it's a minstrel company, and the song is Everybody Works But Father. And I think there's a few songs in here. But at the bottom, how you know if this is a Tin Pan Alley song is here we are, West 28th Street, New York City, with the music publishing credits. So that's how you can kind of tell if this is a Tin Pan Alley sheet music, which this one is. And when we turn the page over here, it also will have that written at the bottom. And this is just a little advertisement for this piece, and complete copies may be had where you bought this, so you could buy the whole thing. This was just inside the cover, but at the top it would say, try this over on your piano. This is the way early sheet music would be put together. And of course the song that we actually have bought for this one is Everybody Works But Father, and we have the vocal and piano parts right here. So as sheet music becomes more available in locations across North America, so does the type of instruments that are being made. And so these are a couple from my personal collection that I find rather interesting. This is a zither, and it was a stringed instrument towards the, this one's from the 1880s. And this instrument over here is called a ukulele, and it was supposed to be a combination of violin ukulele. And you played it with a bow. But these are sort of instruments that you don't see anymore, and typical of the period. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you're a big fan of rock and roll and you like records, guitars, and stories about rock and roll, be sure to give us a like and subscribe and ring that bell. It helps us to grow the channel and keep more stuff coming. Thanks a lot. Even a detailed history of black music in North America is really incomplete, and the status of slaves before the Civil War was not regarded as important, and nobody kept track or mention of music. There was an interest in black performers. It was almost always in the context of black men performing white men's music, though. And it wasn't until after the Civil War that we saw this book published, which is called Slave Songs of the United States, and it was published in 1867 as one of the earliest attempts at black song collecting. But given the structure of society at the time, it could only provide a snapshot of African American singing. And you have to keep in mind this is written and at a time when people were just not interested in documenting cultural history. And that's more of a 20th century thing. In 1867, life's dominated by thoughts of survival and hard work, and the notion that people outside your own area or even country would be interested in what you were kind of singing about was pretty unimaginable at this point. But a few songs have survived, and more of the slave spirituals and songs like that. We see songs like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen still exist. 1800s, one of the biggest styles of music in history had come forward, and that was called ragtime music. And ragtime was a music that originated in New Orleans, and it was piano players trying to emulate street musicians that they heard playing brass instruments on the city streets. The epicenter for ragtime, though, became St. Louis, Missouri, and this is where it really exploded, and all of the sheet music publishers began to flock to St. Louis and pick up these songs, and all of a sudden everybody in the country was playing ragtime music. Influence on rag was a style of plantation music that was played where people would promenade in fancy dress either across their porches or balconies or great rooms, and it was called a cakewalk. And the people that were deemed the best of that particular party or ball took the cake, and that is where you get that expression, they take the cake. So in my collection I have a bunch of famous pieces of sheet music, of really popular rags of the day. None are really as popular as Scott Joplin and Maple Leaf Rag. He really was the star of the era. And this is an original piece of sheet music from 1889 of Maple Leaf Rag. And inside here we have the actual composition and the tune. And this is an extremely rare piece, but it does show you the popularity of ragtime stylings, and sheet music of the era was very, very much leaning towards that genre of music. And Scott Joplin was the rock star of the turn of the century. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed that look at some of the influences of early blues music. And we're going to get into a few more of these before we kind of move into the blues that might be a little bit more identifiable to you. But this is some of the early influences of the genre and some of the ways that this music began to, be discovered. So this is a new direction for the channel. I'm going to be doing a lot more of this and using my collection as some reference material for you. But there's going to be a sort of a complete history of modern music through some of the pieces here and some of the people that I feel pioneered genres and things like that. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe and ring that bell, and I'll keep it coming. Keep on collecting, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.